Hello, this is Amanda from Suddenly Autistic, and today I wanted to put forward my thoughts on why I don't believe that everybody is a little autistic. I am reading off this, I've written it all out longhand because I want to get it right and I want to be accurate in what I say. So sorry if I look down or look in different directions to normal, but that's what's going on. Anyway, before I go into that, why I don't think everyone's a little autistic, I am going to give you a little story. I'm going to come back to the story at the end and hopefully explain why I've shared it. So every time I make a video on YouTube, I struggle to say the introduction. I haven't said it here. I have a visceral reaction in my gut when I think about YouTube algorithms, protocols, and chasing popularity. I can't bring myself to write out a same each time intro that reminds you to like my content and share, subscribe, whatever the ding the bell thing. Now, I could shame myself for this oppositional stance, calling it ridiculous, self-sabotaging or defiant, but that wouldn't work to solve my problem as I don't feel any shame around this. In order for me to feel more comfortable in this situation, I first need to establish whether there is a problem or not, whether a problem actually exists. Is it a general problem, i.e. if I don't do this, my goals in making these videos won't be met? Or is it a particular problem within me? If I don't comply with the status quo, I'll continue to feel uncomfortable as a reminder that this is yet another community that I can't seamlessly slip into. A little bit autistic. I've been in many conversations since disclosing my neurobiology where other people have said something along the lines of, oh, everybody's a little autistic, that's why they call it a spectrum. And every time it feels horrible. Putting my feelings aside for a moment, I can understand why some people think that way and feel it's important that I don't immediately dismiss their position, not least because what's being said is not entirely incorrect. I believe that at the heart of this matter is a subtle but important misunderstanding. I believe that what people are saying, typically after they've learnt a little bit about autism and the autistic spectrum or the autism spectrum, is that we all feel a little bit autistic sometimes, and I'm not going to argue with how somebody feels and their feelings. You don't have to be autistic to know what it feels like to be shamed, blamed, scorned, devalued, or covertly othered merely for showing up as yourself. I have a sneaky suspicion that us autistic folks are being appraised in one dimension, as a collection of traits on a spectrum rather than as a fully actualised and individualised human that we actually are. Put simply, we're being related to on the basis of what others can observe or do observe rather than what we feel, what they assume rather than what we understand about ourselves, and what they desire in terms of attachment versus what we need. This would not be a problem if all humans expressed our thoughts and feelings in the same way, but we don't, and that matters. I am motivated by my belief in human kindness and the probably idealistic notion that we as humans do want to get to know each other as we really are, not just as we appear to be. There is a Latin phrase that speaks to this which resonates with me. It's relational in that it references how we appear to others and acknowledges that a gap between our personal and our public exists, arguably for good, though not always for helpful reasons. I have a possibly delusional belief that when we as a human race become more proficient in understanding ourselves, we'll find it easier to understand and appreciate and support both ourselves and others. When it comes to the autism spectrum, I'm leaning towards the belief that we'd be best scrapping the idea of a separate autistic spectrum or autism spectrum, I never know what to say, and instead replace it with a pair plus gap model, so pair plus gap of humanness that covers both what we see, what we feel, and the distance between those two things. It would consist of A, the spectrum of human behaviour, our emotionality, and B, the spectrum of human motivation, our feelings, and a measure of how the traffic between those two areas flows, the bridge between them. I believe this would speak to the real experience of being human better than an us versus them model or an autistic versus non-autistic, which is that, or an everyone's a little bit autistic model, which is trying to get everybody on the spectrum. The latter, the everyone's a little autistic model, often manifests as a seesaw ride between the parts of us leading to our struggles that we may prefer to find an excuse for, I guess, just internally, and the parts of us that shine bright like a diamond and that we may wish to have recognised. An iteration, I guess, of the gift versus curse mindset. The former, the autism spectrum versus people who are not autistic, feeds this notion of separation and then misunderstanding and distance. So that's my big ideas. They're my big ideas and they're out there now. So now I want to go into the detail. It's fear that rises in me, coming right out from my guts when I hear the words, "we're all a little bit autistic." It's a fear that stems from being chronically, lifelongingly, painfully misunderstood to the point that I have questioned my humanness on many occasions. If I'm the same as you, then why don't you understand me? Why do you misunderstand and misinterpret everything I do and say? Why do I not feel collectively like you do? What is wrong with me? As I grew up, I left behind the thoughts of being an otherling, but I couldn't quite shake the idea that I was somehow the wrong kind of human, or humaning incorrectly. How can that be if we're all somewhere on the spectrum? What am I missing? What are they missing? The concept of psychological safety. I've realised the feelings that rise within me when I reflect on the saying, everybody's a little autistic, or I'm faced with whether to preface my videos with an algorithm-friendly intro, have developed into a conditioned or whole person response to protect me from being further hurt by a world in which I'm frequently left feeling othered or excluded by the majority. At the heart of my response is a concept called psychological safety. Psychological safety, in its very broad sense, is the idea that we can show up as we are in our entirety without fear of being judged, shamed or excluded. With that realisation comes an explanation of why I feel triggered when making YouTube videos, and upon hearing the phrase, everybody's a little autistic, I simply don't feel psychologically safe. There's not evidence, or when I go and present myself out there, there is evidence that I'm not actually safe or I won't be accepted. So on making videos, I simply can't make a good video once I'm triggered and feeling unsafe, in the same way that I can't feel connected to others who equate my permanent struggles and confusion with their very bad day. Both situations leave me feeling unsafe and remind me of how different from the norm I can be. But in both cases, I do push on, or at least I try to. I generally cope with these everyday boulder drops to the head by engaging my adaptive response mode, which typically means I feel the fear, recognise it as anxiety, because nothing's happened yet, I haven't been attacked. Engage crisis mode, which often involves me zooming in and out of the situation in an attempt to gain perspective before finally reaching a decision that typically involves me carrying on with my plan. In short, feeling the fear and doing it anyway. I must note here, though, that it is somewhat easy for me to achieve some level of functioning during times of discomfort because of my trauma history. Issues around interoception, lack of, and pain, so I don't feel physically as much as the norm, I guess. There's also my personality type, my scientific mindset, my curiosity and my energy levels, which all go towards making it somewhat easy, or at least not as hard, for me to feel the fear and do it anyway. However, I understand that this would not be the case for everyone, And I can also share that I have been burnt out on many occasions, frequently freezing when faced with situations like this. And indeed, this can happen. I'm not just talking like, a couple of times in my lifetime. This can happen on a weekly basis, that I have times when I really can't function. So now I want to explore triggers with this feelings and emotions model. Where do these triggers come from? Not exploring the trauma and the actual, in-depth situation, but these states inside of us. While preparing this video, I had a sudden aha moment. As part of my autism diagnosis, I was told that I had low emotional intelligence at that time. Maybe it's a little higher now. It certainly wasn't high then. I had taken this to mean that I must be totally out of touch with my feelings. And that is how I received or interpreted the situation when my therapist told me. I actually embrace this knowledge about myself because I like to know where the problem is so that I can work towards resolving that and learning. Me being me, I shared this news with others and was often a little confused when people would try and silver lining the shit show again, or silver lining my low emotional intelligence by saying, "Oh, but you're so insightful, but you seem to know yourself very well. You've made some great choices," and those things are all true. But how curious. Could both these things exist in one person? Fast forward to today, and I realise that these people, and maybe even my therapist in the heat of the moment, were failing to appreciate the distance and distinct difference between feelings and emotions. I can be emotionally unintelligent, i.e. I can't interpret my emotional response as it happens or even reflect on it sometimes. And I can be insightful, because insight comes from our feelings. What I have been displaying is classic autism. My emotional response can be flat or can happen at the wrong time, or with an inappropriate intensity, relationally feeling, so either a little bit more or a little bit less than others might do. My emotions and feelings exist at different levels of awareness in me, as they do with everyone. The way that my emotions and my feelings inform each other is that they can exist separately and they can inform each other together, but it's sort of almost like I have to do a constructive process, a conscious construction to do that, to bridge that gap, to bridge that divide. What this means is what this gives me is a real bird's eye view of myself that's more analytical, has a healthy level of detachment, and can protect the core identity of myself from very strong emotions that tend to block us, such as guilt, shame, and obligation. That doesn't mean I never feel those things. It just means that they're not the prominent, they don't come out that quick. So I do have this opportunity to have emotions and have them not affect how I feel about myself. My natural ability to experience what I've traditionally called my thoughts versus my feelings independently from each other is something that I've now leaned heavily on in my journey towards getting to know my autistic self. Although I now know that what I used to refer to as my thoughts were my feelings, and what I called my feelings were actually my emotions. I have a suspicion that my natural decoupled state is a core autistic trait and is often what people notice when observing people like myself. Sure, trauma might have widened the gap between them, but my current hypothesis is that a gap would have existed regardless. I have often failed to emote appropriately, or even at all for that matter. When a friend of mine went to take a seat next to me at a party and missed, ending up on the floor, still holding their drink, which was pretty amazing, I didn't even flinch. Other people came running to their aid, righting the chair and inquiring as to their person, and all the time I just sat there and waited for our time together to begin again. I wasn't aloof, I wasn't embarrassed, I wasn't uncaring, or away with the fairies, detached, dissociated. In fact, I just wasn't sufficiently moved by what had happened to act on that trigger. I wasn't emotionally triggered in that moment. And I inquired after my friend when the time was right, and we carried on as if nothing had happened, really. or in spite of something happen, I should say, because we all knew that had happened. Feelings and emotions, what are they? So emotions are physical states that arise as a response to an external stimuli. They come quickly, they are usually outside of our consciousness, we have limited to little control over them, at least in that microsecond they are there, they appear as if out of nowhere. They can be observed through the physical reaction, through our body language, facial expressions, maybe sometimes the words we say, but definitely in our bodies, even in our scent that we give off, how much we perspire, those sort of things. So emotions are very quick, they rise very quickly within us. And we don't tend to choose them, they choose us, I guess, or to a point. Feelings are a little bit different. Feelings are mental associations, so we have to take time to develop our feelings. How do we feel about something that happened? So they take longer to manifest. They usually involve other aspects of our being, our history, our sense of self, our safety, our self-esteem, our culture, the norms of society, our goals and aspirations, all that sort of thing. So whereas our emotions are more animalistic and in the moment, our feelings are very much a construct of our whole reality and our whole capacity, even physical and mental. Our feelings are caused by our emotions, so their emotions are the first port of call. They do require some mental association, and they can be hidden even from us. So it's not often the case, or always the case, that we understand our feelings and that we can appropriately attribute our emotions to a feeling. While emotions are a physiological experience or state of awareness, the fact that I'm quite literally wired differently to the norm, so I'm taking in information differently from the norm. So what I see, what I hear, what I feel, how I experience the temperature and the level of wind or noise or anything like that, what I pay attention to is not on a normative scale, it's on an autistic scale. So those externalities, those external triggers would then come into play when my emotions rise and happen. So I can be in the same environment as somebody else and be prompted into an emotion. My body expresses an emotion that other people may not feel. So I might, block my ears if something's really loud, or I might, flinch or squint if I'm too, or I might just be getting a bit annoyed and agitated because I'm too hot when other people are not feeling that at all. That doesn't mean I'm wrong. It's the information that's coming in at me is making that response appropriate. The raw in the moment data, the sensory processing, is often delayed with autism. That is another key feature of autism. So it might be that I can sit in tolerance really for quite a while without really recognising that I'm stressed until a tipping point is reached, which is where the delay comes in. And by that point, I have a fairly extreme situation where an emotional response will be maybe stronger than it would have been had I have noticed the discomfort or the opportunity or whatever it was earlier on. And again, remember that these are not conscious. I'm not choosing these. This is how it is. So my emotions are very much linked to, my emotional landscape is very much linked to or coexists with my autism. It's not separate to that. And then those things together will be used by me to inform my feelings, and my feelings will be guided by my goals, aspirations, sense of self, and how I've been, socialised and cultured. All of this, as I'm saying, is informed by our perception. Perception is becoming aware of something through our senses, the way in which something is regarded, understood, or interpreted. And then we rely on our physical reality, including our energy levels, social identity, and more, to work out how we actually feel about this. So emotions outside of our control, real time, conscious or subconscious, and people can live their whole lives without understanding their emotions and them being quite distant from their actual true feelings, or misunderstanding their true feelings, or even actively hiding them. Emotions and feelings, the bridge versus crevasse hypothesis. So a crevasse is a big crevice or a big gap between two mountains. The example I shared about being non-moved or not very moved when my friend fell off their chair during an event, could be a good example of the bridge versus crevasse hypothesis that I've been mulling over and thinking about. It's a biological reality that we experience a gap between our feelings and our emotions. We all have that and manifest it in different ways, both consciously and subconsciously. What I'm wondering, though, is whether there's a bridge connecting them in the neurotypical versus a crevasse in the autistic. Okay, so that may be a bit extreme. As with all these things, it's possible and much more likely that there could be different types of bridges, as in more stable, less stable, stronger, weaker, thicker, thinner, whatever. Different types of bridges and different severities of crevices or crevasses between people. But the main point that I'm trying to make is, if a strong, reliable and easy to access bridge exists between our emotions and feelings, information about either can flow in both directions quite quickly, with one helping to inform and shape the other in a dynamic, to and fro, real-time way. If the bridge is more rickety, less stable, non-existent, it's logical to expect communication between the two states to at least be slower and potentially to be less reliant on each other, to be acting more independently, or at least not as synchronous. I don't know if any of this is a biological reality, but or even practically possible, but it feels like a good and fitting analogy to me, and offers another explanation as to why I don't typically feel shame as if I'm a bad person when I've been clumsy or made social faux pas. It doesn't occur to me that would make me a bad person, whereas I do notice that's quite a dominant emotion in lots of people who have, especially people who I talk to who have anxiety and social or performance anxiety problems, that kind of thing. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into the emotions versus feelings side of my counter to the everybody's a little autistic argument. Now I want to zoom out and look at embodied versus academic autism. It will likely come as no surprise to anyone who's autistic that being autistic and being educated in the manifestations, strengths and challenges of autism are not the same thing. This is what I'm referring to when I say embodied versus academic autism. While it's true that everyone on the autistic spectrum is different, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, we tend to share traits and patterns of behaviour, the emotionality, and have a tendency to process inputs in a similar way, resulting in some commonality of feelings. Remember that our processing is what we do. We process our emotions, and that informs and comes up with our concept of how we feel about something and how we experience the world. And we also know that with autism there's sensory processing differences in terms of how we actually experience the world through our senses, and in terms of how long we take to process that. To my mind, there's a likelihood that those who consider themselves to be neurotypical and see themselves reflected at least somewhere in the autism spectrum are, or could be, either undiagnosed or unrealised neurodivergents themselves. They might be or traumatised to a level beyond which they're not consciously aware, or they might merely be picking up on the fact that we're all humans, and of course that's okay. However, it's only when enough of the boxes, invisible or visible, are ticked that one is deemed autistic. And in particular, this bridge concept that I'm talking about, how emotions inform feelings, how feelings inform emotions, and how the sensory experience of the individual plays into that. And that is definitely something, being outside of the norm in both of those ways is definitely not the norm, and that's why it's usually classified on a different spectrum. But like I said, I don't necessarily think it needs to be. How others interpret and relate to our feelings and emotions. Feelings are not negotiable. I've always been fascinated by the way people's feelings leak out of their bodies, and yes, I'm talking about feelings and not emotions. As if they have a mind of their own, a mind that defies desire or control. The notion that a poker face, that is, a face that remains stoic and expressionless regardless of the individual's emotional landscape, exists is laughable. To my mind, it's more likely that an individual can either master the art of noticing their emotions almost as soon as they emerge and mastered the art of concealing them, or the person naturally has a flat effect. And in terms of their feelings, that they have, again, mastered the art of noticing and understanding their feelings and then ignoring, like so an active ignoring or scoping them, or almost like creating an imaginary internal concept or concept of self that then they prioritize. I find it easy, but before I go on, I'd say that in both of those cases, the reality is still there. There's an energy happening to maintain this externality. I find it personally easy to bypass people's emotional response and feel this is because of my autism. And again, it may be because of the bridge versus crevasse concept that I proposed. However, I've only known about my autism for a short time. So so for the rest of my life, I thought I might be either a superhuman, i.e. I've evolved past my emotions, I'm in complete control of them like a robot without the emotional chip, because who needs emotions anyway? Or I'm a pathological human. I don't need my emotions, but I see that you do, and I can use that to my advantage. I felt that about myself because that's how I was treated by other people. No jokes. And yeah, sometimes it did not end well for me. People would come at me quite harshly because they thought that I was trying to con them, manipulate them, be powerful over them, take control of them or whatever. And actually, I have no interest in any of that stuff. My goal in life is for people to leave me alone. Even making these videos, and that isn't to say I do love the communication, I do, but I'm definitely not out there to become a cult leader of anything. When embarking on a late diagnosis for autism, I feel it's important to note that you will be screened for all sorts of maladaptive pathological states, and unfortunately for some of us, actually I think again a lot of women do get treated like you are these not so savoury traits and conditions because of the relational emotional situationship as humans find ourselves in, i.e. people read what they see rather than what's there, or they take us at face value. When we've been shamed and basically broken down over time, it can be easy to believe that we are those things too, because we've been told that maybe by others, or because we've seen evidence that, well, we must be, everyone thinks I am, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Summing up, we're at the end. So I do not believe that everybody is a little autistic. But I do believe that everybody can relate to what they hear and know about the autism spectrum at least some of the time. I suspect that it will become more common as more of us are diagnosed and as awareness grows to have this everyone's a little autistic feeling in the neurotypicals, because it's becoming more broad as to what a broader understanding of what autism actually is. I believe we would all human better if we had a deeper understanding of the difference between emotions and feelings. I also feel it would help if we explicitly acknowledged the gap that exists between these two states of being, and that we were more open about the diversity that exists between people in this area and the size of that gap and what that does in terms of how our feelings and emotions manifest, whether we, highly emotional or have a flat effect, or very low emotional register versus how insightful we are about our feelings. Different things. They are different things. I can see how our academic understanding of autism trips us all up in this area of feeling everyone's a little autistic, and how it can lead to us both under and overestimating ourselves in the process, both as neurotypicals and as neurodivergent. My dream for the future is that we can all become kinder and more generous to each other and prioritise being rather than appearing to be, that we invest in actually getting to know ourselves and others with generosity and allowing and accommodating as much as is practical our differences, or making room for us for self-advocacy really and self-protection. Making YouTube video contents means that I'm entering into a public sphere with its own norms and protocols that I can't just slip into and become a part of. I just can't. My emotions present first with a knot in the stomach, a furrowing of the brow, a quickening of the heartbeat and a ringing in my ears. But I do it anyway, because I know from experience that while the body might keep the score, it's important to know what game it's playing. And these emotions are in response to their game, not mine. After a while, my eyes become clearer, my stomach less knotted, my neck and jaw more relaxed. My mind whirs with electricity and light bulb moments come in the form of words and sentences, images and memories. I have insight. I remember myself, what I'm here to do and why. But they exist, the rules, the algorithms, the people who will judge me using their norms, not mine, and I start to tense up again. But this time the tension is intercepted by my consciousness, my awareness. I know myself. I know the risks. I accept, sometimes begrudgingly, the consequences as far as is practical. I feel the fear and I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to do it in a way that's right for me. That is YouTube and being autistic. I am the change that I want to see in the world, or at least that's what I'm trying to be. I'm not a little bit autistic, I am autistic, and this is how it feels. You may or may not be autistic, but we don't all have to be autistic to relate to each other, to be able to relate to each other, to be kind and to be connected. Thank you for listening.